From the Oklahoman newsroom, it's time for Orange Alert, our weekly extended look at Oklahoma State football. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio with fellow columnist Barry Trammell and OSU beat writer Nathan Ruiz. Guys, another big game for the Cowboys after a narrow loss to Oklahoma last week in Bedlam. Now West Virginia comes to town. And Nathan, you know, it was a spoiler role last week that Cowboys almost fulfilled. What do you see as the biggest challenge as it relates to West Virginia on Saturday?
It's got to be their offense. You look at Will Grier, he's a Heisman candidate. He's a little behind when you look at the two big quarterbacks in Tuscaloosa and Norman, but he's a guy who obviously has put up great numbers this season in his second full season as the Mountaineers quarterback, really leading that offense. They're dangerous, but you can't sleep on the Mountaineers defense either. They're ranked second in the Big 12 in scoring defense, total defense, rushing defense, and passing defense. So it won't be an easy challenge for the Cowboys on either side of the ball, but I think Grier is definitely the player to watch.
Now, interesting that West Virginia's defense ranks so high. They have not played Oklahoma State or Oklahoma to this point. Barry, you're going to see the Mountaineers 2 straight weeks, maybe 3 if they're in the Big 12 title game, but that near close call in Bedlam for Oklahoma State, how does that factor into this game in your mind? I mean, players and coaches like to say, well, you put that in the rearview mirror, but still, a 2-point conversion away from upsetting the Sooners has got to carry some confidence for the Cowboys.
Well, you just don't know. I mean, this is a crazy Oklahoma State team. How you can go to Manhattan and get manhandled, how you can go to Waco and lose, and then you go to Norman and could have won, should have won maybe. I mean, this is just a maddening Cowboy team. How will they respond to another excruciating Bedlam loss? They should take some confidence from it. Certainly the offense was performing at a high level. The defense got blistered, but the Sooners blister everyone. And the thing I like is, you know, you mentioned the West Virginia offense with Will Grier. Been great all year except that game against Iowa State, and the Cyclones and the OSU defense have a sort of a similar makeup. So maybe Jim Knowles can borrow some pages from the Cyclones, and you know that was a total meltdown by the West Virginia offense in Ames. So if the OSU defense can hold up, I think we'll have us a really good game.
I guess the question comes down to which OSU team shows up on Saturday. Nathan, that's kind of been the question ever since that Boise game. You know, a great performance against Boise, and then it's just been a roller coaster of ups and downs and highs and lows for this team. Is there any way to gauge or guess? I mean, this is a big game, and they've seemingly gotten up for big games this season.
Yeah, they've honestly been better as an underdog this year than they have as a favorite. They're 3-4 as a favorite, straight up. That's not against the spread or anything. That's straight up. They're 3-4 as a favorite, and 2-1 with that 1-point loss to OU as an underdog. So it seems that maybe they just, like you mentioned, Jenny, they maybe just get up for those games. I think when you look at it, when you look at their best 3 games, penalty-wise, it's 5 against OU and then 4 against Texas and Boise State. So they seem to be playing their most disciplined football when they're in that underdog role, when they really don't have the ability to afford any mistakes. So I think maybe if we see that kind of same trajectory on Saturday against West Virginia, where they're able to play discipline, minimize those penalties, that seems to be when they're at their best. So if they're able to bring out that same style of football, they should be able to be pretty effective.
I want to talk about the matchup of wide receivers here in just a second, but before we do that, as we've talked about, you know, what OSU, how will they respond a week after that close call? I'm curious from you guys' perspective, and OSU, whether it's coaches or players, who's the guy that has to be at his best for OSU to score this win, Barry? Who's that player in the crosshairs in your mind?
Well, I'm going to go back to the same fountain we go to often, and that's A.J. Green. Will Grier will put those cornerbacks on an island, and they got to play well against Sills and Jennings and those home run hitters for West Virginia. The OSU corners played very well for stretches of this season, and then stretches where they haven't played well. So we'll see, but A.J. Green's going to get tested, and we'll see how he does.
What about it from your perspective, Nathan?
I'll say quarterback Taylor Cornelius. He's a guy who, amid this roller coaster season for OSU, he's had one for himself. But since OSU's open date, he's been great. If you looked at him against ranked opponents, Boise State, Texas, Oklahoma, 11 total touchdowns, no interceptions. So he seemed to be at his best in these situations, much like OSU has. So I think if he's able to put up a similar performance, maybe not to what we saw against OU when he threw for over 500 yards, but maybe that Texas game where he controlled the ball, was effective on the ground and through the air, really managed OSU's offense well and helped them get an early lead, I think we'll see OSU have a good game.
You know, this offenses obviously are going to be on display, but to me it's really interesting, the matchup of the Biletnikoff semifinalists. You got Tylan Wallace for OSU, David Sills for West Virginia, a couple really good wide receivers. Nathan, you crunched some numbers though as it relates to these Biletnikoff finalists. What do you like about Wallace? What do you like about Sills?
I think Tylan Wallace's best trait is just his ability to fight for balls in the air. You look at it on a contested catch, it's really not a 50-50 ball with him. It's a 75-25 ball. There are so many times this season where you've thought, oh, that's an incompletion, or oh, it's an interception, and the ball has somehow ended up in Tylan Wallace's hands. So he's a guy who, whenever OSU needs a big play, needs a big catch, he's going to be that guy. David Sills, on the threat hand, he's a guy who's going to be the guy who scores for West Virginia. He's got 12 touchdowns, which is in the top 3 nationally among receivers. So he's a guy who's a threat in the red zone, a threat to score. He hasn't put up big yardage too often this year, but if Will Greer needs a touchdown, David Sills is going to be his guy. Which
is interesting because David Sills is not one of those huge wide receivers. He's not in the Marcel Aitman frame, Barry, but he is a guy that scores a lot of touchdowns, and yet Tylan Wallace is having a single season that, you know, you're going to have to at least talk about in terms of, is this one of the best receiver seasons of all time at OSU?
You know, wide receiver is one of those positions where sometimes we look too much at physical characteristics, size, speed, all those things. And the one thing we often overlook is just ball skill. I mean, can you catch a ball? Can you catch it in the air, like Nathan suggested? Can you maneuver yourself around defensive backs? That's not really something you teach. It's just something you sort of have and can do. It's sort of having a nose for the ball. And Tylan Wallace is not a little guy. He's about 6 foot tall, maybe 5'11", 3/4. But hey, listen, he can really get the ball in contested situations, and that's the most valuable trait you can have. And you go back, you look at the NFL receivers. I mean, possession receivers is a common word. You know, it's just guys that can get open, or if they're not open, they can catch a ball in traffic. And that's not something you can put on a piece of paper and say, you know, he's 6'2", 4'4" speed. It's not something that's you're born with, or it's not something that you can measure. It's something you have to watch on a football field.
Yeah, it's James Washington-esque, guys. I mean, when you think about one of the things that really separated James Washington, it was the ability to catch it regardless. And the only thing that separates Tylan in my mind is you see him drop one every once in a while or twice in a while. I mean, that probably, if he can get that cleaned up, I think you start to see just the excellence that
Still only a sophomore, too.
Still only
Plenty
a
of time.
A true sophomore, by the way. So something to remember. Speaking of classes, it's senior day at Stillwater, in addition to a big game, nationally televised ABC game. But seniors will be celebrated, and Nathan, maybe some underclassmen as well. Justice Hill, Jordan Brailford, both guys that are potential NFL guys. Are we going to see them in that senior parade before the game?
It sounds like Justice Hill is a no. I talked to his mom, and she immediately kind of dismissed that idea of him participating in senior day. That, of course, does not mean he won't be entering the NFL draft after this season and foregoing his senior year. Jordan Brailford seems a little bit more undecided. He recognizes that if he participates in senior day, it just kind of leads to the assumption he's leaving when that isn't a decision he's made yet. So it seems like these two guys, OSU star running back, OSU star defensive end, are both still a little up in the air about what they want to do. Both in very different positions. Jordan Brailford is a fifth-year junior, so he's going to earn 2 degrees in December and a minor. He's a guy who's been here a long time, done a lot of great things on the field, but just battled a lot of injuries. But now, so he's a little older. He's 23. Justice Hill just turned 21 on Wednesday, so he's plenty young. But we obviously seen him now suffer an injury. Had a pretty deep rib bruise that cost him most of the Oklahoma game. So he's a guy that maybe decides, I need to go to the NFL, and if I'm going to get hurt again, it needs to be at that level. But and maybe he just feels that he's accomplished all he can accomplish here. Obviously, you know, he's been a Doak Walker semifinalist. He's put up some great numbers over the course of his career, and if he came back for his senior year, definitely has the opportunity to challenge for OSU's all-time rushing record. But he might decide that that's not what he wants to do, and he's ready to start a professional career. But as far as Saturday's participation, that's still yet to be determined as well.
Yeah, just some big questions out there, and obviously not to be answered maybe on Saturday. But we'll see as the weeks go on, what do those two guys do. All right, let's get to picks. And I don't know if this surprises anybody else, but all three of us here at least are picking OSU to be on the up of the roller coaster, guys. Nathan, you went with a 41-34 score. Tell us why.
Well, I think it's going to be a shootout. I know I mentioned West Virginia's defense, but like you mentioned, they haven't played Oklahoma or Oklahoma State yet, and those are two of the top 4 offenses in the league. The Mountaineers being another one of them. So I think it's a shootout Saturday in Morgantown or in Stillwater. I think it sets up well for OSU coming off that Bedlam trajectory. You look at how they've played in these games against ranked opponents, again, minimizing penalties, minimizing turnovers. It's when they've been at their best. So I think they kind of just carry the momentum forward, continue to use that I formation effectively. I don't know, Justice Hill seems to be kind of a game time decision. He has been cleared, but it still needs to be, there's still some issues with him in terms of just making sure he's able to play a full load. If not, you've still got Chuba Hubbard, who had a great Bedlam game. So I like how it sets up with OSU. I like the shootout. I like how they were able to shut down Will Greer a year ago. Obviously, a different defensive coordinator, a different defense. But I like this matchup in OSU's favor.
Barry, you went with OSU as well by 3 instead of Nathan's 4, but 38-35, a little lower score.
Yeah, I mean, I have a good excuse. I don't know what you guys can, how you can explain it. I just needed a Big 12 upset special. And Cowboys seem more capable than, say, Kansas. So, I don't know.
Why,
here's the deal. I asked Mike Gundy and Dana Holgerson both this week, you guys have any idea what you're going to expect out of this OSU team? And Dana at least said, well, we're going to expect their best because they're capable of it, and they are. What we've seen against Boise State, what we saw against Texas, what we saw against the Sooners. But we also saw this team, what they did against Tech and what they did against Kansas State and what they did against Baylor. It's a crapshoot. Who knows? If the best OSU shows up, I think they're going to win. So they've got a chance.
Yeah, and I've got OSU winning by 4. I've got a 42-38. And I'm going with a small trend, beating good teams at home. They haven't been able to beat bad teams at home, but they beat Texas at home. So I'm going to go with that. I'm going to say that they're going to cut down the penalties. They're going to win the shootout. We'll see what happens. 2:30 Saturday. ABC is where you can watch the game if you're not headed to Stillwater. Be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.